There was a small porcelain bird, pale blue, nestled on her bedside table. It had a chipped wing, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it, a tiny, sharp fragment missing from the delicate curve. I remember watching her fingers, gnarled with age, trace that imperfection. She used to say it was her favorite because it was beautiful despite its brokenness. She never knew I was the one who chipped it. A quick, clumsy bump of my elbow years ago when I was dusting her collection of trinkets, trying to be helpful, trying to earn a smile. She never noticed, or if she did, she never mentioned it. It just remained there on her nightstand, a silent testament to a moment only I carried. And for a second, no one said a word. If this sounds like your silence, stay. You don't owe them your forgiveness, not anymore. And if you know a woman who carried too much for too long, give her this story. The room smelled of antiseptic and something faintly sweet like overripe peaches. Her breathing was shallow, a soft rasp that barely disturbed the quiet. I sat by her bed as I had for so many days, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the subtle shifts in the light as the afternoon faded. We hadn't spoken much in these final weeks. What was there to say? Decades of unspoken things, pressed down like dry leaves underfoot, had made a thick carpet between us. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. Her eyes fluttered open, milky and unfocused for a moment, then settled on me. A faint smile, a mere twitch of her lips, a ghost of the one she used to give when I brought her a cup of tea just the way she liked it. That smile, it never quite reached her eyes. Not truly. Even then, in the silence of her dying, it felt like a practiced gesture, a curtain pulled across something I was never meant to see. She reached out a hand, thin and papery, and I took it, her skin cool against mine. And for a second, no one said a word. You always were a good girl, she whispered, her voice a thin thread. It wasn't a compliment. It was a description, a label she'd pinned on me years ago, one I had worn like a heavy cloak. Good girls didn't ask questions. Good girls didn't cause trouble. Good girls, she implied, didn't notice when things were wrong. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. She took a slow, rattling breath, then another. I have to tell you something, she murmured, her gaze drifting past me, fixed on the pale blue bird on the table. About your money. My heart gave a little lurch, a dull ache that had become so familiar. My life savings gone, vanished into thin air, or so I had always believed. A bad investment, a series of unfortunate events. That's what she had always said. I had never pressed her on it, not truly. Good girls didn't. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. Her words were slow, broken by the effort of breathing. It wasn't lost, she rasped. It was used. She paused, her eyes closing for a long moment. I watched her, my own breath held the chipped bird, the only witness to this unfolding. She opened her eyes again, and for the first time I saw something different there. Not regret, not exactly, but a kind of weary resignation, like a burden finally about to be set down. And for a second, no one said a word. Your father, he had debts, she continued, each word a struggle, more than we knew. After he died, they came, and there was nothing left, except yours. My savings. The money I had worked for, saved meticulously, penny by careful penny. The nest egg I had envisioned for my own future, for my quiet independence. It was all gone, and she had known, all these years. She had known, and she had let me believe it was my own misfortune. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. She turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting mine, and in that moment the curtain finally lifted. Her eyes, so often veiled, held a flicker of something raw, something almost desperate. I had to save the house, to save what little we had left of his name. Her voice faded, a mere whisper. It was for family. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the hum of the machines and the fragile sound of her breathing. For family. The words hung in the air, a familiar refrain, one that had been used to justify so much, to excuse so many quiet appropriations. My dreams, my future dissolved, for a name, a house, a ghost of a man I barely remembered. And she had kept it secret for decades. I didn't hurt them, I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in a very long time. Not the woman who had nurtured me, not the mother who had tucked me into bed, but the woman who had made a choice, a quiet, irreversible choice that had shaped the entire trajectory of my life. And she had never told me. And for a second, no one said a word. Her confession wasn't an apology. It was a statement of fact delivered with the flat resignation of someone who had carried a heavy stone for too long and was finally letting it drop. There was no tremor in her voice now, only a quiet certainty. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was simply revealing the architecture of a secret that had defined my life and hers. I remembered the years of small sacrifices, the careful budgeting, the quiet denial of desires because the funds simply weren't there. Every decision I had made about my future, about where I lived, what work I took, the dreams I let gently fade, all rooted in a phantom financial reality. And for a second, no one said a word. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. She shifted slightly, a faint rustle of the hospital gown. Your father. He was proud. So proud. He wouldn't have wanted anyone to know. Her gaze drifted back to the chipped porcelain bird, then to the window, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows. And the house? It was his mother's. It had to stay in the family. The house. The crumbling facade, the endless repairs, the burden it had always been, yet clung to with such fierce, unyielding devotion. It wasn't a home. It was a monument to a name, a lineage, a past that had devoured my present. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. I thought of the trips I never took, the education I couldn't afford, the small business idea that never got off the ground. All the possibilities that had shimmered and then vanished like heat haze. Not because of bad luck or my own failings, but because the very foundation of my financial life had been quietly, surgically removed. And she, the keeper of this truth, had watched me build a life on quicksand, never offering a warning. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. Her eyes closed again, a sigh escaping her lips. It was the only way, she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. For us. For the family. The use felt like a deception. It had never been for us. It had been for the fragile pride of a man long dead, and the silent, desperate clinging to an illusion of solvency. And I, the good daughter, had paid the price. And for a second, no one said a word. The anger I expected, the fiery rage that should have erupted after such a monumental betrayal, didn't come. Instead, there was a profound stillness, a calm, cold understanding that settled deep within me. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the silence. The decades of polite, smiling silence where this truth had been held hostage while I navigated a life built on a lie. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. Her breathing grew shallower, more erratic. The air in the room felt thin, charged with the weight of unspoken things. I looked at her face, etched with the passage of 80 years, and saw not a villain but a woman trapped by her own fears, her own interpretations of duty and honor. A woman who had believed, perhaps, that some secrets were too dangerous to reveal, even if they cost someone their entire future. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. I realized then that this wasn't about her seeking absolution. It was about her finally unburdening herself, not for my sake, but for her own. A final desperate heave of a secret she could no longer carry into the ultimate silence. The chipped bird on the table seemed to gleam in the fading light, a small, fragile thing, broken but still present. And for a second, no one said a word. She was quiet for a long time, her breathing so shallow I had to lean closer to hear it. The air in the room grew cooler as the sun dipped below the horizon. The silence was no longer heavy. It was vast, like an empty field after a harvest. I looked at the chipped bird, at the almost invisible fracture, and understood something profound about myself. I had carried a different kind of chip, a hidden flaw in the foundation of my life, one I hadn't even known existed until this moment. And for a second, no one said a word. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. Her eyes flickered open one last time. Her gaze was weak but clear, fixed on mine. There was no apology in them, no plea, only a quiet, unwavering truth. I did what I had to do, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. It was her final defense, her ultimate justification. And in that moment, I saw the complete picture, not just the stolen money, but the entire architecture of her life, built on sacrifice and silence, on the relentless preservation of appearances. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. I thought of all the times she had praised my frugality, my carefulness with money, all the times she had nodded approvingly as I spoke of my small, achievable goals, never questioning why my aspirations were so modest. She had watched me, the good girl, building a life on crumbs, knowing all along that the feast had been taken, consumed by the shadows of the past. The betrayal wasn't just the theft. It was the complicity, the decades of watching me struggle with a smile on her face. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. A profound sense of release settled over me, surprising in its intensity. It wasn't the burning fire of vengeance, but the quiet, steady unraveling of a knot I hadn't known was binding me. The guilt I had unknowingly carried, the subtle nagging feeling that I hadn't worked hard enough, hadn't been smart enough, hadn't deserved more, began to dissolve. It wasn't my failing. It was her secret. And now it was no longer mine to bear. And for a second, no one said a word. I looked at her, truly saw her not as my mother, not as the woman who had taken, but as a person at the very end of her story. A person who had chosen a path, made her peace with it, and was now laying down her burdens one last quiet breath at a time. The porcelain bird seemed to glow faintly in the dimming light, a small, still point in a turning world. Its brokenness no longer felt like a symbol of my clumsiness, but a reflection of a deeper, more fundamental fracture. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. Her breathing hitched a shallow, sudden gasp, and then it softened, fading into nothingness. The machines continued their rhythmic beeping for a few more moments, a ghost of a heartbeat, then fell silent. The room was utterly still. She was gone, and the silence she left behind was different from any I had known before. It was not the silence of unspoken truths, but the vast open space of revelation. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. I sat there in the quiet, holding her cool, thin hand for a long time. The chipped bird sat sentinel, its small broken wing catching the last vestiges of light. I finally understood why she loved it. It was beautiful despite its brokenness, yes. But more profoundly, it was beautiful because its brokenness was a secret known only to those who looked closely enough. And for a second, no one said a word. The quiet in the room deepened, broken only by the distant hum of the hospital. I slowly released her hand, my fingers lingering for a moment on her still cool skin. The porcelain bird remained a small, pale sentinel. It felt like a monument now, not to her, but to the silence, to the decades of unsaid things that had shaped both our lives. The realization was stark. Her confession, in its raw simplicity, had undone years of my own quiet self-blame. The weight I'd carried, the subtle shame of not quite measuring up, the persistent feeling of a lack I couldn't name, it all lifted. And for a second, no one said a word. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely light. My gaze swept across the room, taking in the sparse hospital furniture, the wilting flowers, the muted tones of a life ending. There was no grand drama, no tearful reconciliation, no furious outburst. Just the quiet unraveling of a truth that had been carefully hidden. It wasn't about vengeance or even justice in the conventional sense. It was about seeing clearly finally. It was about recognizing that the narrative I had built around my own limitations had been based on a story someone else had written then erased. I didn't hurt them, I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. The silence that now enveloped me was different. It wasn't empty, it was full of possibility. The future, which had often felt constrained by invisible boundaries, suddenly stretched out wide and unwritten. The dreams I had quietly abandoned, the paths I had steered away from, they flickered back into existence, not as regrets, but as unexplored territories. It was too late to reclaim the years, the opportunities, the simple financial security that had been taken. But it wasn't too late to live the rest of my life on my own terms, free from the shadow of a secret that was never mine to bear. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. I walked to the window, pulling back the curtain. The city lights twinkled below a vast tapestry of individual lives, each with its own hidden stories. The world outside felt vibrant, alive, and for the first time in a very long time I felt truly a part of it, unburdened by a past that had quietly dictated my present. The chipped porcelain bird remained on the nightstand, a small, almost insignificant detail in the grand scheme of things. But to me it was everything. A symbol of the unseen cracks and of the quiet, enduring strength found in recognizing them. And for a second, no one said a word. I didn't hurt them, I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. The night outside was deep and still. I stood by the window, the city lights a blur of distant possibility. The quiet in the hospital room stretched around me, a profound and complete silence. There was no one else here now, just me and the echoes of a life that had finally utterly revealed itself. The little porcelain bird on the nightstand seemed to hum with a secret, a delicate testament to hidden fractures. It was still broken, yes, but its truth was now laid bare. My truth was, too. And for a second, no one said a word. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. I touched the cool glass of the window, a faint condensation forming under my fingertips. The years of carrying that invisible weight, that sense of subtle inadequacy, had subtly shaped every interaction, every decision. It was like living with a constant low-grade fever, never quite well, never quite realizing the source of the malaise. Now the fever had broken. The clarity was sharp, almost painful in its precision, but it was also liberating. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. There was no need for grand gestures, no need for confrontation with ghosts. The quiet execution of a long-held truth had already happened. The reckoning was internal, a gentle shift in the landscape of my own understanding. I wouldn't tell anyone. It wasn't their story to carry or their secret to judge. This was mine. It was the quiet justice of finally understanding the true cost of silence, and the silent strength found in breaking free from it even decades later. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. I left the room, the door clicking softly shut behind me. The hospital corridor was hushed, a long sterile path leading away from a revealed past and towards an unknown future. The world outside beckoned a vast, complex tapestry of lives, each with its own hidden threads. My own thread, once tangled and obscured, now felt clear, strong, and entirely my own. The good girl was gone. A woman finally free remained. And for a second, no one said a word. I didn't hurt them, I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me.